Now, I've worked a lot of gangsters over the years, and I've recognized that they have a code of their own code. I worked gangs in South Central Los Angeles for 2 years, and every group I came into contact with had their own code. I worked one guy who tortured a gang rival because that gang rival had made an unwanted advance on his sister. Didn't even touch her, just said something to her. So they captured that poor guy and tortured him to death. Was that right? They thought it was right because they had their own code. It was grounded in that individual, agreed upon by his gang member friends. But is that, I want you to consider the moral hierarchy we all live in. He, for example, has his own moral hierarchy. Jesse believed that he had his own personal beliefs, his own code. His gang to whom he belonged had their own decrees. But in California and Los Angeles, for example, you have to follow the municipal codes. That's one level above. These things dictate onto Jesse. These things dictate onto his gang. Not only that, there are penal codes in California that dictate onto Los Angeles, and there are federal laws that dictate onto California. And the United Nations would like us to believe, at least, that there are certain decrees that dictate onto the United States. My question for you is there yet another transcendent layer of moral responsibility? If there is, what could this be? I actually think there is a code up here. I'll show you what I mean. If Jesse thinks he's going to go out and buy a car tomorrow, he might choose a crazy car. He might choose a red Yugo. I don't know. He likes red. But you know what? That's his personal choice. It works for him, but may not work for anybody else. But it's his choice. He can actually justify that moral decision. His gang, though, could say, no, Jesse, we don't drive those kinds of cars. That'll be spotted in a heartbeat. We drive cars that blend in. And this is what we drive. We park those cars wherever we want. So if you're going to be part of our gang, you have to have that kind of car that works for us. It may not work for anybody else, but it works for us. Therefore, they are sufficient to establish that moral code. But you can't park your car anywhere you want in Los Angeles. We got laws. I don't care if you are a gangster and think you're somebody. You can only park in certain areas. If you want to live in LA, you got to bend your knee to that. That's true for all Angelinos. May not be true for other cities, but there are places you can't park. That means that Los Angeles is sufficient for those kinds of laws. But you know what? If you park your car on the street, you better have a tag on it from your registration, because in California, without that, you're going to get a ticket. May not be true for all states, but it's true for California. And that means that California is a sufficient grounding for that law. Now, to be honest, you may not have your tag on your car in every state, but every state says you got to register your car. So it turns out registration is a national issue. It may not be that way in every country, but it's true for all Americans. And that's why the American law system is sufficient to justify that law. Well, wait a minute. How about this? Let's get out of the United States for a second. What about on the international level? Let me give you a crazy law. Is it ever okay to use a car bomb in your car? I think, could you argue this? I think that the United Nations would say this is true for everyone, but some people in the group of the United Nations would say, no, actually, we think that we are unjustly being treated. We can actually save more lives by killing a few with a car bomb. We think we're justified in this regard. So we would say, not necessarily. Not necessarily true for everyone. So it seems like, this is where the law stops, really, at the United Nations level. Can you think of any laws that transcend the United Nations? They're already starting to argue about this law at the United Nations. Actually, I think we can. Is it ever okay to use a car bomb just for the fun of it? Would any nation say that was okay? Well, no. Once you take out some kind of a justification, you say for the fun of it, now we all agree. This is a law that transcends every nation, everywhere on the planet at any time in history. It's not just the car bomb law. It's never been okay to torture someone for the fun of it, to steal for the fun of it. Do you see, if you just add for the fun of it, at the end, you're going to find a set of universal, transcendent, objective laws that transcend every nation. They're not made here. They're not made here. They're not made here. As a matter of fact, even if it's just Jesse, they apply to Jesse. But if we're in a Star Trek universe in which there's a confederation of planets, they would also apply to the Klingons and the Romulans. They actually transcend species. They transcend the planet. Where do these kinds of transcendent laws come from? That's the problem. They're in this outer ring. But what's that outer ring? We know one thing for sure. All moral laws are about personal obligations. Did you know that? Think about it. I am not personally morally obligated to my police vehicle, and I am not personally morally obligated to my flashlight, and I am not morally obligated to the laws of physics either. You are not morally obligated to inanimate forces. You are only morally obligated to persons like your partner or like the people in your city. That means we're looking for something at each level that is personal. Whatever it is that transcends the outer ring, it cannot be an impersonal force of physics because you would not be morally obligated to that. I'm looking for a transcendent person to whom I am morally obligated. See the problem? This is why Dawkins, who rejects the transcendent moral person, at least recognizes that there is no objective transcendent moral person. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. The problem is, in order to explain objective moral truths from inside the room, you've got to do it a number of ways. One, you can just say there are no moral truths. It's all an illusion. Or you could say, you know what, they're the product of some kind of cultural convention. Really? Tell the Nazis that. Who gets to decide who's right if it's one culture against another? Is it the strongest culture gets to decide? Well, get ready to accept everything the Chinese believe because they outnumber us. Cultures don't decide moral truth. I showed you that hierarchy for that reason. Are they just human-specific facts that emerge through genetics? Oh, really? Well, then try telling somebody that you shouldn't behave that way. My genetics are different than yours. Sorry. My genetic history is different than your genetic history. Sorry. Moral laws don't come from genetics. So any effort to stay inside the room to give you objective, transcendent moral laws fails for any number of reasons. Instead, we need a referent that transcends all of us that happens to be personal. And that's why you're stuck outside the room again. Here you are looking at what Jerry Footer, who's not even a Christian, says this. Science is not about facts. It's about facts, not norms. It might tell us how we are, but it couldn't tell us what is wrong with how we are. There couldn't be a science of the human condition. You can't get this from physics. This is something you get a different way. How in the world can I take anyone to jail if atheism is true? Here's a guy who I watched for weeks. He was a drug addict, and he was a multi-generational burglar. His dad was a burglar and a drug addict. His brother was a burglar and a drug addict. This guy I watched for weeks. He would walk around, score dope, and then finally he ran out of money and had to do a burglary. And he would walk down the street, knock on doors. When finally somebody would not answer the door, he'd go around the back door, and I watched him do this. And I got in the backyard behind him, and I peered over the fence, and I watched him walk up to the back door. He tried the door, it didn't work. He sat and he thought about it for a second. He didn't just kick the door, he waited. He smoked a cigarette, got the nerve up, and he kicked the door. Now let me ask you a question. This guy is actually a drug addict. So you could argue he's coming off of his heroin. There's a certain brain chemistry. Couldn't you argue he only did it because of his brain chemistry? Couldn't you argue that he's a multi-generation? Maybe he's genetically predisposed to be a burglar. Can I really blame him? Of course, when he got to court, that's exactly what he kind of argued. But should I be able to hold him responsible? Let me tell you what they did in front of a jury. The judge looked at all this, and they held him accountable for it. They sent him to jail. Why? Because the judge said it pretty plainly, you had a choice. But did he have a choice? If atheism is true, do we all have a choice at all? It turns out atheists like me love certain things. We cherish certain things. We have a high regard for love and charity and empathy, but is there really true love if you can't truly, freely choose it? If you can't freely choose to love, you can't call it love. You have to have freedom to choose love, to have real love. Not only that, you have to have the freedom to choose between competing ideas to call this reasonable. Or to be creative, you have to choose between choices. Heck, even if I'm gonna hold you accountable, it can only be if you have a choice. I can't hold you accountable for your eye color. You had no choice. How can I hold you accountable for your actions if atheism is true? Here's what I mean. This stuff requires true free agency. Choices you can make freely. But really, why should you think you can make free choices? If the universe is, as atheists say it is, it's only got space in it, it's got time in it, and it's got matter, which means that the entire universe is just a material entity, a material environment. And if that's true, we have to buy into something called materialism. If materialism is true, we have to buy into something called physicalism, which means all the universe is just about physical properties. And if physicalism is true, we have to buy into something called determinism. Because if physicalism is true, all you have are cause and effect relationships between material objects. And you thought you had choices to make in your brain? Really? No, those weren't your choices. Those were just prior neurons that fired physical events in your brain that caused another cause. Like dominoes falling in your brain. Dominoes don't choose. Dominoes simply fall because of a prior physical event. You thought you made free choices? No, you didn't. Those were just physical events that occurred you had no choice over. You're no more than a robot, but we think we are more than a robot, don't we? We think we're something better than that. But here's what the atheism will provide for you in terms of determinism, and it's said by this atheist philosopher. Everything that will happen next week is already determined, as is everything that will happen next month, next year, and so on. It's also crucial to point out that human beings and their actions would not be immune to the effects of determinism. If there are exceptionless laws of nature, it stands to reason that our bodies, including your brains, would have to obey them. If that's the case, we need to stop calling these guys corrections officers. I work with these guys all the time, right? They work in correctional facilities. These are the officers that work in correctional facilities. But think about it. If atheism is true, could I really ever make a correction? Could I ever choose to do something? I should stop doing this and choose to do that? Is correction even possible if everything is physically determined? I don't think it is. And that's the problem with atheism, is it really promotes this idea. So what they try to do is redefine what free will is. Maybe it's what they call first and second order desires. I'm not going to get into that with you, but it doesn't work. Or they'll simply say, well, hey, your consciousness and your free agency, they just emerge. Just pops out. Just, I can't explain how. It's all cause and effect by physical, but then all of a sudden you have abilities. Really? That's worse than magic. Because at least with magic, I have a magician. This is, I got just, I think it pops into existence, a hat and a rabbit, but no magician. Then you have this one. Maybe we can just attribute this to quantum level mechanics. Oh my gosh. The idea here is that the quantum level, very small, there is not necessarily a cause and effect relationship. So that means that maybe you don't have to have rigid cause and effect determinism. Really? So then your thoughts are indeterminate? That's not better than having determined robot thoughts. This means your thoughts are there. You don't even know why you thought that. They're indeterminate. You can't even trust that you followed a logical sequencing. There's no cause and effect in your thoughts. That's too much to bite off. The problem, of course, is you're trying to stay inside the room with all of these theories, none of which get the job done. On the other hand, if there is a mind that chooses freely, creates freely, and creates in its image, now you can get something that Sam Harris, the famous atheist, denies. Because Sam doesn't believe there's a mind like that. So he just says, you know what? I know that my worldview does not allow for free agency. So therefore, I think free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which they are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. We do not have the freedom we think we have. That's what you have to say if you don't acknowledge there's something outside the room that could create in its image freely.